Oh, hi there. Welcome back to Soliloquies Behind the Church. I'm just kidding. Today we're going to be talking about the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis and conversations that don't help with making friends or trivia. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis is I thought it was a really great idea to make a video about because it's something that anybody who's been to university and studied or got a Bachelor of Arts, anybody that's got a Bachelor of Arts has learned about this in your class at some point, and nobody will probably remember it. If you can go dig up one of those $800 paperweight first-year textbooks you got, I guarantee you it's going to be in there. But none of us have those textbooks anymore, do we? So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis was developed, I guess, by a couple guys named Sapir and Whorf. They're not really important to this conversation, so we're not going to go into that. The hypothesis can be broken down into three different stages or categories or sides. There's three different sides to it. So there's the hard hypothesis, which is that language determines your cognitive ability, that they're directly related. So that would be an example. Like, for example, it would be someone who speaks Russian and someone who speaks English would think completely differently, and they have no capacity to think the same way as the other person, just limited by their language. This is also referred to as linguistic determinism. The weak hypothesis would say that cognition is influenced by language, but not necessarily limited. There's no parameters around what you could possibly learn by language, but the language that you speak as your first language would definitely have a significant impact on the way that you think, how you think, all of that. And then the null hypothesis would state that cognition and linguistic ability, or the language that you speak and the way that you think, are a purely spurious correlation. Now, a spurious correlation is something that appears to be related, but actually is not related at all. Politicians use spurious correlations a lot. An example of a spurious correlation would be when ice cream sales go up, more children drown. So should we stop selling ice cream to save children? Well, no, because you can prove that it is a spurious correlation because their ice cream sales and children drowning are not related at all. They're both, however, happen more in the summer months. So it just seems like they go up. So detractors to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis are people who don't believe that it's a real thing, and there's a few of them, which we'll talk about later. They say that that there's not related at all, that all humans kind of think in the same way, regardless from birth, and that language are merely tools that we use to express our thoughts, and that, it's not really related. I got most of my research and information from Dr. Lera Boroditsky. She is probably the foremost expert or author, presenter in this field right now, but she does have some very famous and well-known detractors, which I'll get to at the end of the video. So what I'm going to do is just give out about 7 examples of situations where the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis can be observed, and you can kind of make up your own mind on whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, and then I'll conclude with the other side, people that say that, doesn't have anything to do with it. Okay, number 1. In Australia, there is this Aboriginal group. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name, but they're very easily Googleable. And they don't have the words left or right in their language. So they have your southeast arm and flip your hair to the northwest and vary that. And every way that they have of communicating in their language uses directions for everything. So what ends up happening with that group is that they are 100% aware of their orientation at all times, which is pretty much, unless you speak that language or grew up in that culture, there's really no way that a human would know which direction they were facing at all times unless you had some sort of point of reference, or it would take you a couple minutes to think about it. But yeah, that's one example. Number 2, time perception. So different languages like Arabic, Hebrew, I guess even Japanese, Chinese, they read languages in a different direction than people who speak, say, like French or English or Italian. As English speakers, we read left to right, but other places read right to left. They read top to bottom. They read top to bottom and then right to left. And when interviewed or experiments have been done in those situations, it's shown that people perceive the way that time happens in a much different way. So, for example, in English, you could say, Christmas is coming, or it'll be Christmas soon. So that's two different ways. Christmas is coming sounds like it's coming at you, and Christmas is soon means like it's kind of in the future. So other languages are more fixated on their perceptions of the way that time is shaped. But I don't have time to go into all of those experiments. Number 3, color perception. So there are different levels of color perception and different ways in which the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis can be observed, either for better or worse with color perception. So one example would be how in Japan, the word green and blue are fairly interchangeable in certain respects. Like the traffic light, when it turns green, they actually say blue. The sky is blue. The grass could be blue. But this doesn't mean that they don't differentiate or can't differentiate between blue and green. So this would not be able to prove any sort of linguistic determinism, because they still have a word for green and they can see the differences. However, in one culture in very rural Namibia, one group only has a couple words for color in their entire language. And when presented with an experiment of having 8 blocks of color, where 7 are blue and 1 is green, most of the people in that tribe were not able to correctly identify the difference between very obviously different shades of blue and green. Okay? Number 4, masculine and feminine. So I speak English. I grew up in Canada, and English is my first language, but we are heavily encouraged to learn French. So when you start learning French, you're like, why is everything, the masculine feminine thing gets really confusing. So I was like, why is this table a chair? Why is this chair a man? Or I don't even know. My French is really bad. So I was thinking, like, do people actually see those objects as men or women when they speak those languages? And it turns out they actually kind of do. So if you look at a bunch of European languages like German, Italian, Spanish, Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian, Icelandic, a lot of different languages that use masculine, feminine, and even neuter terms to like organize their nouns. When asked to describe those nouns using adjectives, countries that describe certain nouns or objects with the masculine pronoun, I guess, they would use more masculine type adjectives to describe those objects. So in one language where a bridge is a feminine, people will say like, oh, it's beautiful, or it's so elegant, or it's timeless. Where if in a language where a bridge is masculine, people will say, oh, it's very strong, it looks very powerful, it's very formidable. People would use sort of words like that. Number 5, marketing. So in marketing, the way that everybody knows this, that the way that items are sold, packaged, the wording that's used is so critical to whether people buy it or the perceptions that we have of those objects. So one example could be peaches. So prunes were wanting to kind of rebrand their image. So a company that manufactured prunes resold it as dried peaches, and their sales instantly shot up, especially with the younger sort of hipstery, gluten-free market. But they also kept the prunes because old people want, the laxative qualities of a good old prune, right? So you obviously, maybe if you were watching this, would think eating a dried peach sounds a lot better than having a prune, right? Number 6, the blame game. So in an experiment that was done, people were shown an image of a man knocking over a vase, a very expensive vase at a museum, and then asked to describe what happened in the scene later on. People who speak English as their first language are very concerned with associating blame with a particular action. So whereas people who speak, say, Spanish are not as interested with the blame aspect of what happened, but more of the accident. So a Spanish-speaking person would be able to recount the events as, oh, an accident happened at the museum, or a vase was broken. Whereas in English, we would say that guy broke that vase, or a tourist broke something at the museum. We wouldn't say, oh, there was a terrible accident at the museum. We would say that guy broke the vase. Could this possibly have something to do with the fact that Americans love to sue each other? Who knows? Number 7. This is, I guess, the last one I have time for. There's this thing called the Hangul supremacy. It's a theory that's out there. There's no evidence for it, and there's no evidence against it. But it is sort of like a lot of people will assert this belief that the Korean language, which is Hangul, a lot of people will assert that the Korean language, Hangul, is the most efficient language, or it's the smartest, or people that are able to learn that language are then able to learn a lot more languages. There's lots of literature out there about how Korean is the super language. I don't believe that there's any empirical evidence to support it. It is still a very interesting theory, but that would also be a situation where you could observe or test out the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So finally, in the video, I would like to talk about the other side of the supporters of the null hypothesis, the ones who don't believe it. Plato was really old. He also believed a lot of crazy stuff, but the old world, like the Aristotles and the Platos and the Socrateses and those folks, they all believed that your thoughts came from reincarnation, that you were sort of gifted your wisdom and your knowledge from your previous life, and then you would gradually unlock it over time. Huge detractor to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis was, or is, Noam Chomsky, who is the father of modern linguistics. I'm a huge fan of his. Not sure I agree with him on this. And also his contemporary, Mr. Steven Pinker. So Mr. Steven Pinker is a Canadian cognitive psychologist and a linguist, and he also doesn't agree with it. Though Chomsky and Pinker would state or argue that all of the correlations between language and thought are spurious, that all people are capable of understanding and thinking in the exact same ways, that we all possess the exact same vocabulary, but they are just merely locked in our minds until we can be used to express them, or until we need them or are taught a way to express them. But at the end of the day, language and thought are not related. So yeah, and that's the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Go dazzle your bartender, really just tickle your Uber driver pink with these facts, and stay safe and keep socially distanced. If you like this video and you want to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. You can edit out a lot of shit, I'm sure.